We are live. And now I'm going to.
Chile is a beautiful country. In many ways, it's like California in the western United States. It's next to the Pacific Ocean, it has beautiful weather and amazing landscapes. Unfortunately, it also has wildfires. This past February 2024, a wildfire broke out in the communities of Valparaiso and Viña del Mar on the coast, just west of Santiago, the capital. The fire moved very quickly under hot, dry conditions. Over 130 people lost their lives, 9,800 homes and structures were burned, and over 22,000 acres were scorched. But amongst this tragedy, there was a success story. One community had the
Hey,
wildfire come
Nick,
right up to their doorstep,
Yeah.
but didn't lose a
did you see
single
Jen?
house. How
Yep.
could it be that this one community survived when the nearby ones lost over 50% of their homes? As part of our mission here at WUI to understand what creates wildfire prepared communities, we decided to get on a plane, go down, and find out for ourselves what created this success story. In the week that we spent with scientists, researchers, and residents, it became immediately clear that they had done a lot of preparation work ahead of time. Turns out there was a wildfire in this area 2 years prior. After that, the residents decided they needed to organize themselves and take action. They got started quickly and purchased equipment with the help of a grant from USAID through the State Department. We spoke with Rodrigo Vargas, one of the community leaders, who shared that they organized community work days, cleared brush and vegetation stretching all the way around the community from about 30 to 100 feet outward from the perimeter wall.
Welcome, everyone. This is the webinar titled The Neighborhood That Did Not Burn, How One Community Defied the Flames. I have three special panelists here who are going to be talking about not only what they learned about this particular community, but the research that's been done here in the United States that's widely available. And with the wildfires that occurred in California a couple months ago, it seems like we've now had a wake-up call around wildfire, and there's a huge focus on what we can do to defend and protect our communities. So I'm going to go around the horn and have everyone just quickly introduce themselves. We'll start with Dr. Ann Cope. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. Dr. Ann Cope. I'm the Chief Engineer for the IBHS. We are a not-for-profit. The contributions that run our facility come from the insurance industry, and we study wind, wind-driven rain, hail, and wildfire.
Frank.
Hello, everyone. My name is Frank Freebolt. I'm the director of the Wildland Urban Interface Fire Institute at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I've been here about 2 years. Our mission is to help create the most fire resilient communities in the world. Thank you.
Ivan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ivan. I'm the co-founder CEO here at WUI, and I'm a certified wildfire mitigation specialist, prescribed fire practitioner, and have the privilege of leading a team of about 15 folks who are focused on how we identify and mitigate wildfire risk at the property and community level.
Yep. So thank you to the three of you for joining. And for the audience, this is LinkedIn Live. You can communicate with us. There's a little bit of a time delay, but in the comments section, when you type in the comments, we can see them as well. So by all means, any questions that you have, observations, thumbs ups, we appreciate those. Tips, you can do that in the comment section. So Frank, the back image of your screen is very fitting because that is the community itself. So how did all of this get started? How did we find out about this particular community? What was the connection? Why are we here today?
All right. Well, first, thank you for having us and taking the time to cover this story because we think it's really amazing. Really, what got me and got us down there was this picture. I had seen it come up, and we've all seen, kind of the air quotes, miracle house here, miracle house there. I've been in the business since '79, and I've seen, onesie twosies, but I'd never seen an outcome like this. And the wind didn't stop blowing. That's usually what happens in conflagration conditions. Structures either don't ignite or they ignite, burn to completion until the wind goes away. And in this case, none of those things happen. And so this was fascinating to me. How in the world did this happen? I would have, if I were betting on this, I would have lost the bet 100 times out of 100 that outcome would have happened. Because I looked at the landscape before the fire. There were some fairly recent Google Maps. I thought, well, I mean, it looks like there's a lot of ash there for a lot of fuel, but let's look at the before and after. And it was remarkable. So I did some digging, found out that our university, Cal Poly, had some history down there with the Catholic University of Chile, Dr. Roberto Morris, kind of through the architecture side. And so I reached out to some faculty members, and we contacted him and we said, hey, we're fascinated about this outcome. Can you give us any information? And they were ecstatic to get the call because obviously they were reeling in recovery. And so essentially I decided we got to go down there and look at this. The other thing is that he had hinted, as Ivan had covered in the video, I got little snippets that there may have been intentional mitigation work done here related to the USID work. And I thought, wow, if we could figure out what mitigations, what role they played in the survival of this community, that would be a very powerful message stateside as we're trying to pick this up. You know, the work that IBHS is doing, had it a long time. I love the team there. I've worked with them for a number of years. And so to make sure we were looking at it through that lens, I reached out, and Ivan is a certified inspector for their standard. And so what I wanted to make sure is we brought someone down who was going to look at this setting through the lens and the standard of the IBHS wildfire prepared home mitigation. So essentially we put together, I think we ended up with 6 people all total, but we kind of broke up the research team into 2 groups. One would work more on the kind of the policy background, administrative, sort of that side. And then Ivan will cover a lot today on the field research side, going out, you know, ground truthing, finding out what happened. And then through the course of our time down there, we, you know, there were a lot of interviews and different things. And I was actually asked to stay over and meet with their version of our wildfire commission the week following. And that set up an ongoing dialogue with both their university, their country, and ours. We have a memorandum of understanding between Chile and the state of California, because as Ivan said, as we're driving across the country, we're naming places as if we were back home. You know, oh, this is Big Bear, this is Santa Barbara, this is, you know, fill in the gap. It was just remarkable.
The geographies are almost identical.
Yeah, it really is. You could just name these, you know, name these places that way. And so really that's how we ended up getting down there. And then we'll spend the rest of the time telling you what we found out.
Yeah. So what were some of the findings? You know, I'm privy to that, but Ivan, you know, you were part of the investigative team. As you're canvassing, talk about a little bit about like the work that you're doing, canvassing. What are you looking for? What did you find?
Yeah, so as Frank mentioned, we had an entire team dedicated. We spent about 3 days on site, going around the community, met with the neighbors, understood what they had done prior to, and then what it looked like afterward. And this fire event happened early February, and we were on the ground mid-April. So we had about 8 to 10 weeks, excuse me, of delay there. And so it was about as fresh as it could be, I think. And I'm going to pull up some slides here that kind of talk about that. And here we are. And so some of this was, and just as a real quick background. So, you know, we as Frank mentioned, are partners with IBHS. We work closely with Dr. Cope and her team. We do lots of consultations, mitigation work. We offer software for insurers, fire agencies, communities that want to engage their policyholders and residents in doing this work and, you know, proving that this can work at scale. And so, you know, every time we're doing this stuff, it comes with an approach of doing the inspection, moving into a plan, getting work done, and, you know, in the case of an insurance policy, coming up for renewal and making sure things are maintained that way. And so that's really very similar to the approach that we took when we were on the ground in Chile. And for Botania, we saw, met with the residents. They had organized themselves, as Frank touched on. They got into a grant, purchased some tools, and trained. And this is an example of, on the left side here, what it looked like prior to the work day, and then what it looked like after the fire, for example. So we were able to kind of compare what the community had done in their work days. So here was another example. You can see that green wall there. They had, raked back the vegetation. You see a lot of what we would call ice plant, which is like a low-lying succulent often used in coastal California to, stabilize hillsides. We saw lots of evidence of that burning. And so, a lot of times I think we think, oh, if it's got high moisture content, then it's lower risk, but it does still burn. We saw other places where at the top of a rise, where, here on the left, you can see everyone's raking back kind of the grasses, which was great. And notice at the top of the green wall there, it did see some fire and started to enter into the community. So even though they had cleared, the ground area quite a bit, you could see there was some grass left over, and that it did expose vegetation inside the community perimeter wall. And then we saw a lot of close calls. There were multiple instances where we spoke with residents, one of whom was one of the last to evacuate and one of the first to come back. I think it's interesting in Chile to understand the social context here. Property insurance is not widely available, and the professional firefighting services are about 1/4 the number per capita as what we are typically seeing here in the United States. So these residents, for them, this is existential, and they really, embraced the importance of mitigation to protect their community. On the left here, you see a structure that's right outside next to the home had started to ignite. Someone was there to put it out. And then in the middle view, this is a wider angle shot of what you see on the left side here, but where we saw wood fences around the neighborhood, the vegetation carried the flame right up there, and even some damage here on the right side where that shrub had been. You start to see charring at the bottom of the fence line. Some other things that we looked at. So wildfire prepared home, of course, we are very experienced with that, and took a look at the individual homes and the general condition of the community. And I think, Anne, if you have an opportunity now, you could share with us a little bit about the background of wildfire prepared home and the types of things that are important for that. And then we can look at it in the context of what we saw here in Botania.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to do that. So I've got some fun and interesting videos of things that we have done here at the Research Center. But first, I want to describe the chain of conflagration, which Frank has already alluded to. So this slide goes, the content of the slide dates back to work that Jack Cohen had done. And when you have an ignition source and then you have extreme fire behavior, all of us have talked about wind. When you have that high intensity wind and you're getting away from things, then you get to the point where you have so many ignitable structures that you overwhelm the ability of our fire protection resources to deal with the onslaught. And with that, just population of structures that are easy to ignite and easy to spread between each other, combined with that high wind, that's what kicks off suburban conflagration. So these are some images here from our laboratory where we are studying how do we break that chain? Why does the one structure burn and the other one doesn't? What kind of threat is provided when things that are normal in our neighborhoods are burning and impacting the structures near them? What can break the linkage from things that are burning to your valued home, the place where you live and the places where you work and sleep and play. How do we keep those things from igniting and becoming the fuel that serves the fire and creates the conflagration? So taking, you saw the pieces there from Britannia where things are igniting. If we take, decades worth of science that have been investigated after events have occurred and then tested and tweaked and investigated here at the laboratory, you can separate the pieces into how do you protect against those windborne embers? And then how do you further protect against radiant heat and flame contact? So just a few years ago, the Wildfire Prepared Home program is rather young. So Ivan and his group have been doing this for a couple of years now, but that's young in terms of codes and programs for homes. We've packaged it into these very important pieces. One for embers, a second layer above that for radiant heat and flame contact. Here's what it looks like if you're looking at an individual home. For the Wildfire Prepared program, there are three main pieces there. First and foremost, the roof. You got to make sure you have a Class A roof, and you got to make sure you have non-combustible gutters and downspouts. That's number one priority key feature, because look at that house. The roof is one of the biggest things there. In most cases, it is the biggest thing. So it's going to be primary in terms of defending against the impacts of fire that's in the wildland. The next is there's a couple of building features. You want to make sure you have ember resistant vents. You want to make sure that you have 6 inches of non-combustible around the base. I even just showed you a picture of the bottom of wood fencing. This is the bottom of your house. You want to make sure that those big embers can't light the bottom of the house. And you want to make sure that you're clearing and keeping defensible space. That third bucket there, 0 to 5 foot non-combustible. It's right there around the structure. You don't want those wooden fences and those other things to wick the fire right to the house and set it on fire. Prevent ignition right there next to the home. Everything that you see there in the blue list, those are all the additional features above and beyond the base level of wildfire prepared home, where you get additional protection from radiant heat and flames. And these are the things that you typically think of if you're standing around with your local fire chief and you're talking about home hardening. Many of those things that come to mind when you think of home hardening are in that blue list, which is Wildfire Prepared Home Plus. So these are the features and pieces. And now Ivan might want to jump back into, what did you see there when you went to Chile?
Thanks, Anne. So when we looked at this community, here's a nice photo. We can see that there's quite a bit of defensible space around the entire community. So they had done at the neighborhood level quite a bit of work. Some of this was thanks to the property developer that had, cleared some land for additional planned homes, but they hadn't yet been built. So on the right side and at the very top of the screen. And most of the photos that we saw previously were from the left side area where we have that steep drop off. Some of the other things, when we looked at the roofs, very likely Class A fire rated roofs. We saw 100% had asphalt composition shingles. So that's one component of a Class A fire rated roof. All of the homes were similar in that they had stucco siding, so non-combustible, and also a general lack of wood fences in the interior of the community. So to your point, the wick or the fuse, if a fence ignites, being able to take fire to the side of a building, even if it's stucco, we don't want to expose even non-combustible features to flame. We don't want to test the construction. So those were things that we saw pretty ubiquitous throughout the community. Very few vents in this community. We know that embers entering attic spaces or underneath in our foundation crawl space can accumulate and then ignite. And unfortunately, we see a lot of homes that burn from the inside out because embers penetrate into those areas. So fortunately, all the vents that we could observe had very small openings, 1/8 of an inch, which is consistent with the wildfire prepared home base level standard. And then that zone 0, this is where we did not see 100% compliance by any stretch, but I think it's interesting to note, as we're showing here, significant percentages of the yards tended to be non-combustible, concrete or pavers. And what vegetation we did see was generally away from the homes. And it's, I think, a pretty interesting finding too, that this community had an exterior concrete wall that, with very little vegetation that extended above that wall. So there was not a lot of nearby vegetation that could send embers over the concrete wall. The concrete wall seems to have played a significant role in potentially the outcome.
Hey, Ivan.
Yeah.
We got an audience. We got a couple of audience questions. I think some of them you're going to go into. I believe one audience member asked that masonry non-combustible wall that we saw in one of your earlier slides. Is there a wall that wraps around the entire community?
Yes. So generally, the entire community had a concrete wall and extended all the way down here across the back and most of the way here. And it was right around this area that we saw different types of walls. So there were some that turned into like metal panel, corrugated metal panels. We saw open wrought iron, vertical bars. And then you can kind of see right here in the foreground, this one on the edge has a wood wall, and then this one over here had a wood wall. Why, we don't know, but those were the areas where we saw a lot of the close calls.
Yeah, and I think you're going to get into this, but I think several commenters are asking about the decision making that went in. I think we're going to go into that, but they're wondering it looked like from the slides a lot of the individuals were doing the work. Like, how did they know what to do, and how was it coordinated?
You want to take that one, Frank?
Oh, well, I was going to come in and add something else.
Go ahead, Frank.
You're seeing the static piece of this. Imagine so that the slide that you're looking at right now, at the time of the fire, the wind would be blowing directly in your face. And so if you see off on the right, you see a very, very deep, steep drainage there. And you can't quite see it. There's one on the left-hand side as well on the screen. It's not quite as steep. It has some other disturbances in it. But one of the things, and this is pure conjecture, right? But we were trying to figure out, even as Ivan went through, it was clear that we did have ember cast, especially on the perimeter on the two flanks. But we were surprised at actually how little ember and ash, as the interviews, like how what people found. We were delayed, but it almost seemed like part of the main part of this was spared the sort of the typical ember cast. We couldn't figure out why. And so the best theory we could come up with, it was a combination of really just a couple things. One is there was so much, we call it alignment in the wildfire world, where you have, fuel, weather, topography, all of it is perfectly lined up for maximum efficiency and spread. And you kind of had that going on both sides of the community. And it's almost like a miniature jet engine there, right? It is just drawing in massive amounts of air in behind it as thermal columns going on either side. And so we almost think that comparatively in between, that may have had this little micro high pressure area simply because these two other areas were so aligned, bringing in air, getting pushed and then launching out the backside. Also, it's hard to see in this one, but on the far side, in the very back of this picture, they had put up a big dirt berm. People had started to, I think maybe people had started depositing their little treasures out on this open area. And so to preclude that, they dug a trench and then put the spoils on top of it. And it made, if you think of the way a snow fence works, right, you get this strong lee side eddy effect. And it appeared that some of the ember cast may have been actually picked up in that lead area. Now, we clearly had lots of spots. I forget, Ivan, how many ignition points did you find inside the community?
There were at least 9.
Yeah. And under these conditions, had someone not intervened, those would have burned to completion. So a unique thing about this is that their organization there would be very similar to our CERT teams, community emergency response teams in the US, but there they added a wildfire component. We don't do that in the US. And so when we would go visit these communities, they would have a C train, and they would have the typical things you'd find in a CERT equipped community, but they also had basic firefighting tools. They had these flexible back pumps, kind of piston pumps, some basic hand tools, and as Ivan had mentioned, right, strong sense of community ownership, no reliance on the insurance. These people are doing it to protect their livelihood. They're not, sort of passing off the risk someplace else. They're owning it. And so they did what we would call fire front following. And as the minute they could tolerate the conditions, they went right back in there. And it looked like, from Ivan's team's research, which was great, they were very thorough.
Frank, most of the community evacuated. So these CERT-like folks, like, that was their designated responsibility to hang around. They were putting their lives at risk, hanging around, and it's likely because of the wind conditions. If they had not put out one of those 9 ignition spots, they could have lost the community. It was the one final thing they could do to prevent the fire from spreading.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't there, so we're piecing it together. But Ivan's team did some pretty significant interviews with the people. We put together the timelines, and it sounds like that's what they did. Yes, they came back in. There were no real formal firefighting resources there that we're aware of, and so they went back in and did these ignition, suppressed these ignition points. So a combination of things. But the whole takeaway for today is we need to make that outcome on purpose instead of sort of happenstance. And it can clearly happen, right? So how do we take the best research that IBHS is doing? How do we get that implemented at scale on the ground? And then how do we make that data and those mitigation actions visible? In our country, we need to make that transition to the risk transfer side. In Chile, there are some significant differences there. But anyway, just a little more background, the survivability on kind of what happened at a granular level.
Yeah. So, Ann, you and Ivan, I think what I think ultimately I would like the audience to walk away with lessons here. IBHS has been doing research for years on this thing. So IBHS now has the wildfire protected neighborhood, and Botania is the neighborhood that had all of these conditions. Ivan and Ann, can you compare and contrast what IBHS has sort of recommended over the years, what this community did, and are there additional layers that we can add here?
Yeah, so Ivan, why don't you describe what the community did, and then I'll describe what's coming up soon with Wildfire Prepared Neighborhood.
Sure. So I think making that connection between the individual structures and the mitigation work and tying it into the neighborhood context to, as Frank pointed out, create the conditions that, if we do need to get a little bit lucky, we can, we create the luck and help our first responders out by, making sure there aren't enough ignitions that it quickly turns into the urban conflagration scenario that Ann described earlier. So in terms of what they did, they had cleared a lot of the vegetation on the left side of the image here. They had purchased radios so that they could communicate as a community. This community was more than just this neighborhood. Behind us in this image, there were, probably 5,000 residents in the broader community that were underneath this this organization that had gotten the grant. So there was that, and then they had purchased backpack pumps to with water so that they could go around and put out fires if they needed to, and as a result, they were able to keep on top of the ignitions that did start. And maybe, Anne, you could talk a little bit about, how wildfire prepared home connects with wildfire prepared neighborhood.
Absolutely. So the pieces and parts of wildfire prepared home that we just described there, clearly the home that is just shown there on the screen would not have been designated because it had so much vegetation right next to it. And it went by kind of quick. So let me show you that one again. Stucco, lots of bushes. Sadly, that home was lost. It's in Pasadena. And as we've all harped on, conflagration follows humans. Flash or prolonged drought gives that vegetation, even the succulents, will catch fire. And when the wind blows so hard, it really overwhelms the firefighting resources. Wanted to just touch on that wind thing for just a minute. So these are graphs of wind speeds in both the Palisades and the Eaton fire. And the dotted red lines there show when it was ignited and then how quickly it went. 14 hours for the Palisades fire to go to 70% of its eventual fire area. 24 hours for Eaton to go from ignition to 96% of its eventual burned area, because the wind speeds were well over 30 miles an hour and you cannot use the air assets, and the things are just driven by the wind. So it's that critical red flag, high wind speed time periods. That's when the neighborhood, the individual homes inside the neighborhood and the neighborhood itself, that's when the neighborhood has to withstand what Mother Nature is throwing at it and allow the fire service personnel to catch up to the event, to get rid of it so that it's not a big suburban conflagration. And the factors within the neighborhood in order of priority are the density of the structures. Now we saw in Botania, they're very close together, right? So density matters, but also the connective fuels, and then what do you make the buildings out of? So here's another home in the Pacific Palisades. Again, another stucco and very non-combustible home, but lots of vegetation. The fire finds a way in. How do we take what's needed at the parcel level and also look at what's needed at the community level? So you'll see from us later this very month, you're going to see an announcement from IBHS that we are working together with a builder to put together a wildfire prepared neighborhood. So the premises about embers being a primary source of ignition, and then direct flame and radiant heat, you'll see those in this new designation program that will be coming out. All of the homes in the neighborhood will need to be mitigated to deal with ember attack in those high wind type of situations. And then if you think of your neighborhood like the one you saw in Botania, it has a perimeter. So how do you protect the perimeter against incoming flame and radiant heat? And then how do you make sure that the whole neighborhood has good ember mitigation, ember reduction, less likely to ignite the structures? When you take all those pieces together and do a real good look at what kind of threats are coming into the neighborhood, now you've got a pretty good foundation. And then you take a look at how connected are the things within the neighborhood. And once you get to a point where you're like, yeah, all right, we've broken the chains within the neighborhood, then you can say this neighborhood is best prepared to deal with wildfire. And again, real excited about this brand new program, and it's coming out literally this month. Very excited to see it coming.
And just to throw another plug on that, we took it on ourselves at the Institute. Actually, Roy Wright came out to visit a while back, and we said, you know what, let's take the campus where I'm at, Cal Poly, and it is smack in the middle of the WUI. And so Roy Wright, and very seriously, and also, and Jess kind of poked me in the ribs, say, Frank, where's all the defensible space here, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, well, yeah, I've been here about not quite 2 years. They haven't asked me yet. But what we did is I met with our risk managers and our facilities people, and I said, hey, we've got a real issue here. And they had just, for different reasons, they had just started getting exposed to this. So long story short, we are going to use the Cal Poly campus as a proxy for some virtual neighborhoods and work with them on the development of this wildfire prepared neighborhood. One is we need to do it for the campus itself, but we need to be front and center involved in, you know, all the stumbles and learning and the rest of it takes to get this done. And then on a personal note, I'm bringing Ivan out. I just moved out to Cal Poly recently, and he's going to do a wildfire prepared home inspection on my house. And we're going to walk through that too. So I think the thing I would share with people is that, you know, we're all committed to this, both professionally and I would say even, you know, personally, because we have to start changing the outcomes here. We can't just keep doing this. If you really want a short example of how little we've done, watch a 26-minute video called Design for Disaster. It's from the 1961 Bel Air fires. And unfortunately, with the exception of shingle roofs, you could have run that on January 10th and not missed a beat covering the LA wildfires, it's a sad commentary. So we need to get busy, and we've got a lot to do.
I think that's well said, Frank. And, you know, walking the walk is, I'm looking forward to working with you all at Cal Poly and other neighborhoods around. Dr. Cope, so you mentioned that you're going to be doing some work with a new home builder, developer, community developer. How do you see the program Wildfire Prepared Neighborhood eventually being used for existing neighborhoods?
Absolutely. The scientific facts, the science doesn't care whether your home is brand new or whether your home has been there for 20 or 30 years. The science doesn't care. We as people find it easier to develop something new with new developments and new buildings because we can start with a fresh page, right? And so once you can get the kinks worked out, as Frank described, you're going to see us piloting these things in 2025, because there are some things that are unique to a whole neighborhood. It's much more it's much easier. It's much more controlled for Ivan and your team, you know, to go out to an individual home, because the owner has control over everything that's on that parcel. And you're like, look, wooden fence, gotta go. And so that's something that individual owner can take care of on their own parcel. Once you start introducing the entire cul-de-sac, well, where does the playground go? And where does this go? And where does that go? And now you're dealing with group dynamics. And as we launch this program, there are things that we need to learn about it within a piloting situation. So you'll see us do that for new and one or two existing communities this year, communities that are already firewise, are already geared up and ready to think this way. So you'll see us do some piloting before the program is ready to expand and go in the next couple of years to a more public, anyone can apply sort of situation, because there's just so much that's got to get worked out in this big group. You know, wildfire is one of those things. You know, growing up and going through school, sometimes you didn't want to have a group project. You wanted to just do the work yourself because you knew what the outcome was going to be. Whether you wanted to or not, wildfire is a group project. And so we have to think of it that way. And we will absolutely eventually get to the existing neighborhoods. But if you're a firewise community and you're like, well, what should I be doing? Get everybody on board doing wildfire prepared home, and you'll get closer and closer to a wildfire prepared neighborhood.
Yeah, that's beautiful. We have like a ton of questions.
Oh, cool.
So we'll kind of weave this in. Frank, this one's geared towards you. And Ivan, I'm going to remove the slides for a second. You can put them back on if you want later on. But what trade-offs do we need to think about? What if we train CERT in basic firefighting and fire front following, with hand tools. Can you provide some insight into that particular question?
Yeah. So this is, I'm going to back up just a minute and I'm going to pull an example out of COVID. I was running an emergency operations center that whole time. And you go to different sources, and there's an epidemiologist, I think it's Dr. Michael Osterholm. And I loved what he said one time. He said, look, normally we get to do the science, not in real time. We get to do it over time and spread it out. And in that sense, he says, we're doing the science in real time, and it's messy. And in many ways, we are doing this science in real time. Ann's correct. The physics of heat transfer are the same anywhere, and they don't ask anybody's permission. Yep. And so we're having to figure this out with there's no, it's full transparency and on all the warts and all that go with it. And I said that in preparation for this question is that, yes, a CERT type team with a little bit of extra training and a little bit of extra equipment was able to come in and do firefront following here and really make a change. That's a great, great story. If we do that 50 times, there's probably 75, 80% of those that could have a very, very bad outcome. I'm talking fatal outcomes. So we're still trying to sort this out. There are some groups like this starting to emerge in California. There was actually some effective work done both pre-incident and during incident I think especially in the Palisades area. So we're starting to look at this. I would not be comfortable at this point just saying, yeah, let's just get some people, some backpack pumps and some hand tools, and they're going to figure it out on the fly. I don't think that's a good idea. However, if we could get to where we do with a lot of other houses, if it's a really bad snowstorm, you don't stand out on the front lawn or you don't drive away. You go inside, grab your favorite beverage, look out the window, go, man, it looks nasty out there. And you're fine. We need to build communities and homes to where we don't have to worry about fleeing from the fire. These are fire-dependent landscapes. So we need to get into a spot where we're adapting to that. And then the last thing, the question about the gels and some of the other things, I would just say that the sort of the Achilles heel to those types of mitigations is that they always require a human element, and they always are subject to the laws of logistics. And I can't tell you how many of these systems struggle with, when you buy them day one, they're fine. 5 years later, after you've had them in a while and forgotten about the shelf life, and they maybe weren't stored correctly, and maybe you're not home when the fire hits. There's a lot of other things that go in there. If we will just build properly so these things can survive and it's not an accident, all the other things that we're talking about are unnecessary.
Yeah, and I want to dovetail onto something that Frank said about the CERT team. So truly impactful in this particular situation. And we got to keep in mind all the work the community had done to reduce the vulnerability of their neighborhood to wildfire. Before, there were only 9 ignitions because of all the work that the community had done. And so then a team that was assigned a duty of firefighting, and here in the US we have wonderful fire services, but because of the reduction in the vulnerability, a team that was assigned the duty was able to successfully perform their job. And I want to make sure that point is driven home in this particular example. We can't take our current communities and expect the type of outcome that we saw here.
And I'm just real quick, I'm going to really nail that. So Ann had this great slide on the conflagration loss sequence that Jack Cohen wrote about. We're hearing all this discussion about, we needed more water systems, wider roads, more firefighters, more everything, except the thing that's way more cost efficient and much more highly reliable. Simply make these things to where they don't ignite. You don't overwhelm the firefighting resource. You have an ability to not start the conflagration loss sequence. all the other problems get better when you do that.
They
But
do.
that's hard work. That is hard work. It's a big social element. But to go chase these other things is highly, highly inefficient. And honestly, in those kinds of conditions, you have marginal chances for success. I've done this a long time. You get 2 or 3 layers of homes going, you don't change that outcome.
Yeah, and there were a bunch of questions like this. I think there's this
Okay.
feeling like, okay, how do we
How do we get
start?
started? Yeah,
How do we get
that's
started?
absolutely.
What are we doing in this particular question? Again, I think Luke Beckham is our has a bunch of questions, so he's very much into this. But
Yeah,
you know,
he's hot on the keyboard. Okay, so
but
Luke,
Tanya
how do you?
built a
Yeah,
wall, right?
right.
So like, what are the things we have to do? And it sounds like building a wall might be one of the simplest things we can do for a community.
Well, yes, and a point that Ivan made early on was that looking outside the wall, there was very little vegetation that crested the wall. Okay, so the wall was effective for the landscape in which it was placed. Let's not grab that idea and throw it into the redwood forest and think it's going to work, right? And I'm of course exaggerating, right? So, what pieces and parts do we bring? As soon as we announce later this month about the wildfire prepared neighborhood, the standard will be available that people can go and look at it. Here's the key features. Class A roofs matter. Building separation matters. So if you're building new, make sure that 90% or more of the structures are going to be more than 10 feet apart. If you already have a neighborhood, you already have a neighborhood. Connectivity and mitigation for individual homes. Homes in that neighborhood should be wildfire prepared and hopefully wildfire prepared plus. But existing neighborhood, go for wildfire prepared, which will get you the class A roof, right? So wildfire prepared, separate, and then look and see how connected things are. Do you have lots of hedges that will wick things from one structure to another? Is it lots and lots and lots of wooden fencing that will wick to each structure? Bust that up by having the metal gates so that one can't light the other homes. Breaking the chain is the way to get started.
Yep. And Ivan, I think this is a question for you, but like Frank had said, it's a lot of hard work. We saw it in the video. We saw it in the pictures, people on their hands and knees digging with hand tools and other things. So, and backpack pumps, like we're essentially going medieval, but we almost have to. Like it's like, you know, all of the above. You got to do just about everything. But can you talk a little bit about some of the tools that were used in Botania? That, you know, these are just tools probably you can buy at an Ace Hardware store, right? Like what are some things that will help here?
Yeah. Basic landscaping tools. You saw some of them in the shipping container that the community had purchased. Things like McLeod's, which is actually a firefighting tool used on fire lines, and backpack pumps. Again, we're still using these things actively with our professional firefighters. And so they, you know, rakes, shovels, picks, anything you can use to remove vegetation in and around homes and the immediate surroundings of the community. And when it comes to Firewise USA, I think it encourages a lot of the similar things, limbing up trees at least 6 feet off the ground in the common areas of the community and further away from homes. There are some key differences between NFPA Firewise USA and Wildfire Prepared Home. And I don't know, Anne, would you like to touch on a few of those?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So Michelle Steinberg, whose group runs Firewise USA, she and I are great friends. And Firewise USA is a fantastic opportunity for communities to get together, understand their risk, and start taking action. Wildfire Prepared Home is for the individual homes within that Firewise community or any other community. So hand in hand there. As we develop Wildfire Prepared Neighborhood, we have done so in communication with experts from lots of different organizations, particularly NFPA. So we see those Firewise USA communities because of their awareness, as being the ones who have the best opportunity to start on that path towards achieving a designation level of wildfire prepared neighborhood. These programs, the science is the same. We're all speaking about wildfire science. Firewise USA is a great way to get started. They have a fantastic network, community awareness, getting your neighbors together. It's a great program. And how do you get to meaningful reduction of risk for the entire community? You do the things that will get you to that designation level of wildfire prepared neighborhood.
Yeah, and we put up, it's not a question but a comment,
Great.
for densely communities that already exist and they've already built densely, right? Like it's balancing the challenges with densely built communities, and Bruce Flynn as well put up a community comment as well around like a lot of these communities, they're almost stubbornly engaging. So I think there's some comments in the comment section that are asking how do we get some impetus to kind of move the neighborhood focus, get people together. Is it as simple as having a community session with donuts and coffee and just how do we do that?
Looks like Frank has a great idea.
Well, I'll jump on that one because this has been, most of my time in the fire service was, well, really all of it's been in the WUI. Some of those, the wildland firefighter, a lot of it is in a kind of an all risk situation. So a couple of things here. One is questions about existing communities. The way we're approaching our work at the Institute is we're treating this as the disruption of heat transfer in 3 different pathways concurrently. One is final approach into community on the vegetated side, vegetation to vegetation. Then that transition, you're always going to get the ember cast. We'll talk about that in a sec. But as Ann talked about, that ground fire approach and those connective fuels, so vegetation to structure pathway, and then pathway spread within the community from structure to structure. So the way we're approaching existing communities, which is really my focus, is how do we disrupt the heat transfer in all 3 of those pathways concurrently so that we stop that sequence. So, that's the general, plan here. In terms of getting people to do these things, I can tell you, if I just do that, think of the mitigations as a bunch of thin magazines that you're trying to hold up. And if this local fire chief is one bookend, you know what happens, right? They all fall out the other side. But if we can get the private sector, specifically risk transfer, to be the other bookend, and we want the same outcome. Neither of us want loss of life and property in the WUI community. We want the same outcome. You've heard Ann say it, the physics are the same. We need to start aligning so that we're saying the same things because the science is the same. And with 2 bookends, you hold these up in the community. Can someone push me out as an appointed fire chief? Certainly. Can they ignore their insurance carrier and their mortgage? Probably not. And so this is going to be like all tough things. It's going to be a little bit of carrot and it's going to be a little bit of stick. We've done these kinds of things before. We've just forgotten about them. We've taken on big challenges. This is going to take a long time.
Yeah, I'm thinking there was a comment in the comment section about people's affinity towards their landscape, right? And their affinity towards non-native vegetation, the eucalyptus trees and things that are highly combustible. And I think for the team here, like I would like to get your feedback on that. Like, we're Americans, we pride ourselves on our freedom, and I want my yard to look like it's, the south of France. So I want these things. They're a little bit carrot and stick. I think there's going to be a little bit of a battle with folks that aren't going to want to compromise.
I think the way I address that is I usually first thing I like to ask is this mindset of your home is your castle. I get it. Castles were a long distance from each other. They were non-combustible. A lot of these things don't make sense if you live on a 40-acre parcel. You're really talking about individual structure protection. And honestly, if you don't do the work and you burn your own place down, a lot of those things we can't force. But the minute you start having enough proximity, density, so that what you do affects the person next to you,
Yeah.
We have a long history of public health laws for things like that, right?
Yeah.
So I get the idea that we all want our own freedom. You also have the freedom to save up enough money to pay cash for whatever it is you would like to live in. And if you don't do that, it means you're going to have to take out a loan. And the people that are going to give you the loan are going to want surety for what they sent out. And so they also have the freedom to decide to make you carry insurance. So if we're going to pursue our freedoms, we have to understand everybody gets to pursue them.
Yeah. And back to the question about other insurance incentives coming. Every admitted carrier in California is required to offer premium discounts for mitigation measures, very similar to wildfire prepared home. Today, those discounts can range widely, and I do expect, though, that the value of the discount on offer should increase over the next few years. And we're working with an insurer right now at WUI who has a very progressive approach to adopting predict and prevent, where they've offered to renew policyholders who get the wildfire prepared home certificate and designation for as long as they hold on to that. And assuming that wildfire would be the only risk factor that would cause them to be non-renewed. So we are seeing insurers step up to the plate, offering the incentives that Frank was chatting about.
One last thing too to remember, I'll use the COVID example again. We were all excited when somebody, I think it was Pfizer or whatever it was, had the first vaccine, right? Held up the vaccine. That's great. The distance between a scientifically derived vaccine and global herd immunity, there's a lot of distance in there. And so it's the logistics of taking the science, getting it into the field, getting it implemented, getting it maintained, getting it adopted. That's the hard work, and it will take decades. But this issue is global. There's no smartest person in the room solution here, right? This is we all have to figure out how to make this adaptive change. It is our turn to adapt.
Yep, and we have 3 minutes left, so we'll squeeze in one more question. And this one, I'm focused on. I live in Florida, so I understand building codes matter. Ivan, this one was pointing out that, like, and I think both Anne and Frank have indicated this. Every community is a little bit different. The geography is a little bit different. The fuel's a little bit different, and so one size fits all is not going to necessarily work. So current codes don't necessarily operate that way, but should they? Could they? What can we do here?
Well, I would just say codes are always lagging. They're always lagging quite a bit behind for different reasons. But even if you build better, new construction always becomes old construction. So we have to do both. And honestly, if we don't figure out how to keep the existing inventory from burning down, we're going to have a cascading series of financial consequences. I don't want to be a doomsday person here, but the signals are pretty clear. It may have started in insurance, but it's marching its way through realty, property values, taxes, and I think general obligation municipal bonds. So we had better figure this out, and we can't do it by new development. We have to mitigate the existing inventory of structures in the U.S.
Well, and I want to point out that the building codes only impact the small percentage of things that are going to be. Building codes are also a minimum standard. So, technically, the building code is the legal limit by which someone doesn't go to jail for negligence. And so, to say that building codes have a singular focus, building codes are meant to protect life, and they are usually a minimum standard. Building codes have increased over the while to also mitigate the loss of property, because that's good for our economics and good for our communities. But there's a lot that needs to be done to the existing structures, and a lot of that comes with choice making and group projects.
Yep. So
yes.
we will end it there. For those that are listening, we will figure out a way to make the full recording available to you. And that intro video was from Ivan. There is a bit of a documentary coming up on the entire process as well. This is just a discussion to kind of spur what lessons can be learned. But Ivan, Dr. Ann Cope, Frank, thank you so much for participating in this. From the audience reaction, they learned a lot.
Great.
Thank you for having
Thanks,
us.
everyone.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you, Nick.